Hey everyone, what's going on? If you've been following my channel for the majority of the summer, in regards to Major League Baseball, I've been talking a lot about the connections to the Chicago Cubs and also the Cleveland Indians. And if you're new to what I'm talking about on this channel, I talk about, signs and symbolism and patterns that exist within my own life, the mainstream media, and, you know, our sports leagues, our told history, everything is truly interrelated. We live within some type of mathematical code and these patterns that exist. And there are people who understand this knowledge and they have been using it to rule over us, but it still exists within our everyday life. And if you pay enough attention to these patterns, sometimes you can figure out what is to come in the future. And there's been lots of things that have been pointing to the Indians and the Cubs. And we recently got this John Madden video game shooting in Jacksonville that was all synced up to the War of 1812. The shooter was from Baltimore, and in history, the the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, was written during the Battle of Baltimore in the year 1814. And the War of 1812 came to an end after Andrew Jackson won the Battle of New Orleans. And Jacksonville is named after Andrew Jackson. And that's where this Jacksonville shooting happened. And, 43 days before this story, we got a story about a jaguar that escaped from the New Orleans Zoo. Jacksonville equals 43 in gematria, which is the practice of coding numbers into words and phrases. So does John Madden. So does the word football. And we've established there's a big connection to the War of 1812 to the NFL season this year. But this Madden shooting is also seemingly very connected to the Chicago Cubs. And even think about the Cubs coach, Joe Madden. I know it's spelled different, but Joe Madden. Then we have this Madden shooting. And this guy left me a message on Facebook about Daniel Murphy being traded to the Chicago Cubs. And I had previously talked about how the Cubs are cursed by the curse of the Billy Goat, or they were, and the Billy Goat was named Murphy. And, my mom's maiden name was Murphy, and there's all of these connections. I'm not going to re-explain it. You can check out some of my other videos. But we also had the Blues Brother guy named Matt Murphy die this year, and then he was the husband of Aretha Franklin on the movie The Blues Brothers that's set in Chicago, and then Aretha Franklin also died. Matt Guitar Murphy, and he died at the age of 88. And in gematria, Curse of the Billy Goats equals 88. And if you remember the Steve Bartman incident, after that happened, the Marlins scored 8 runs in the 8th inning, stuff like that. And then that same year, I think the White Sox went on to win the World Series for the first time in 88 seasons. And, much, much more. Think about Back to the Future in regards to the Chicago Cubs. They were supposed to win in 2015, right? They were supposed to sweep in 2015. Think about Back to the Future and the time travel speed being 88 miles per hour. And that is really important because Daniel Murphy used to play for the New York Mets, the team that went on to be in the World Series. They upset the Cubs on Back to the Future Day. They upset the Cubs on Back to the Future Day in 2015, and they went on to play the Kansas City Royals in the World Series. And the Royals won for the first time since 1985. And that World Series began on October 27th. And October 27th, 1985 is the day that that's the day that Back to the Future ends. That's the day that Marty McFly goes back to, and then the time machine gets destroyed by the train. But what else is interesting about all that, so the Mets, or, the Cubs get Daniel Murphy, and he used to play for the Mets, And the Cubs also got Cole Hamels, and that just sticks out right away to me because when you look at this game on Back to the Future Day, let me find it here. Sorry. On Back to the Future Day in 2015, when the Mets upset the Cubs, and they didn't go to the World Series, well, this is the wrong one here. This one right here. The pitcher for the Cubs was Hamill. His name was Hamill. Now the Cubs pick up Cole Hamels. And in 2015, the year of the Back to the Future Day, Cole Hamels no-hit the Cubs 88 days before Back to the Future Day. What are the odds of that? 88 days before Back to the Future Day, 88 miles per hour. Curse of the Billy Goat equals 88. Anthony Rizzo, even born on 8/8. Cole Hamels also won the World Series when he was with the Philadelphia Phillies. I believe he was even the MVP of that World Series. And they beat Joe Madden's Tampa Bay Rays in 2008. So just think about all this intertwined web. Cole Hamels now with the Chicago Cubs. And Daniel Murphy, the former Met, it syncs up to Back to the Future Day. Now with the Cubs, it's also synced up to the Curse of the Billy Goat. Anyway, what's so interesting about Joe Madden, Daniel Murphy just so happens to be from Jacksonville, Florida. What are the odds? Jacksonville, Florida. His birthday's also April 1st, which is Easter, and Easter was really important to what I was talking about with the Cleveland Indians this year, because we got that holy fire in California at Cleveland National Forest, right? And the Indians are cursed by the trade of Rocky Colavito to the Detroit Tigers in 1960. They got traded on Easter Sunday of 1960, and then the Indians played an exhibition game that same day at Rustwood Park in Memphis, Tennessee, and later that night the park burnt down, right? And a holy fire is a fire that happens around the time of Easter. So we get this, what they call a holy fire for some reason in California. And when Rocky Colavito was traded, Rustwood Park also burnt down that day on Easter Sunday. And this year, Easter just so happened to fall on April 1st. So, interesting that he's from Jacksonville. He also got traded to the Cubs on the same day that they played the Detroit Tigers. And at that game, they were doing a tribute to Aretha Franklin. And apparently there was a rainbow that appeared while they were doing the tribute for Aretha Franklin, right? And think about how that's connected to the Blues Brothers yet again. Daniel Murphy and Matt Murphy as her husband that was on the Blues Brothers. Also, Aretha Franklin just so happens she was born in Memphis, Tennessee, where Rustwood Park was, right? And Elvis, also from Memphis, or the Memphis area. Elvis even played a show at Rustwood Park. It is it's crazy here because, just check this out. The reason that they had pink Cadillacs at Aretha Franklin's funeral was because Elvis, I'll just point it out really quick, Elvis was known for having pink Cadillacs. If you look up Elvis, he owned pink Cadillacs. And when you look them up, he owned more than one. The first one he owned was destroyed in a fire between Hope and Texarkana, Arkansas. And then he later bought a new Cadillac and painted it pink, and then it got wrecked by his guitar player, Scotty Moore, and he wrecked it in Texarkana, Texas. So they both got destroyed in Texarkana. And we just recently had the death of Burt Reynolds, who is in the movie Smokey and the Bandit, that it's set in Texarkana, and then they're bootlegging Coors beer to Atlanta, where the Super Bowl is going to be held this year. And at the Jacksonville shooting, remember on the video game, it was Atlanta versus Atlanta. Also, it's interesting in regards to the Indians yet again because the last time the Indians won the World Series, they beat the Boston Braves, who are now the Atlanta Braves, right? So there's some interesting parallels there. You also have, another guy who died the same day as Aretha Franklin and Elvis was this Robert Johnson guy, who was the original member of the 27 Club, and supposedly it's said that Elvis had the soul of Robert Johnson. And when you look up Robert Johnson, you find out that he supposedly sold his soul to the devil, and it was at a crossroads outside of Rosedale, Mississippi, and the devil even told him he could go the other way to Cleveland, Mississippi, or go to look at the river or turn around. But then he went straight to become a star, basically. So just interesting he even mentions Cleveland. But think about it. Elvis supposedly had the soul of him. He supposedly sold his soul to the devil. Aretha Franklin is the queen of soul. Think about the Blues Brothers and the song Soul Man. And I'm going to leave some videos in the description, but if you watched some of my previous videos where I was talking about there was something to do with the pink symbolism, the color pink, and how it was synced up to ghosts. And just think about souls and ghosts, and then think about this pink Cadillac, So there's definitely something going on with Memphis in regards to a lot of this. It's super important. But let's go back and look at this other post here. I didn't want to get too far off, but they truly are all interrelated. Daniel Murphy got traded to the Cubs because of his name being Murphy, and then that's why we got the death of Matt Murphy, who was the husband of Aretha Franklin on the movie The Blues Brothers, and that's why it's important to Easter, because it's synced up to the Indians, but it's also synced up to the, Holy Fire in Memphis, Tennessee. Joe Madden even wears number 70 as a number, which is odd, but he wears number 70, and Indians equal 70, and they haven't won in 70 years, something I've been pointing out all year. What else is interesting then? So the whole point of this, in regards to the War of 1812, and that's the war that Francis Scott Key wrote the national anthem in, and he wrote it in the Battle of Baltimore. That's why that Jacksonville shooting was so important. But the Cubs were in the World Series against the Boston Red Sox in 1918, which was the year that it got popular. During that World Series, it got popular to stand during the national anthem at sporting events. So it syncs up to the national anthem. And if you look up Daniel Murphy, in 2015, he also was under some heat because he made a controversial statement about a guy named Billy Bean, and he didn't like the fact that Billy Bean was gay. And, he said, whatever, he didn't like the fact that Billy Bean was gay. The reason that Francis Scott Key went to Baltimore during the Battle of Baltimore was to get his friend William Beans out of jail. Billy Beans, think about it, Bill Beans, William Beans. Billy Bean equals 53, William Beans equals 53. Talking about how it's connected to Super Bowl 53 that's going to be played in Atlanta. Think about the Braves in regards to the Native American theme as well, along with the Cleveland Indians. That's why the Washington Redskins I swear the Washington Redskins aren't going to win. It's coded just to this Native American theming that is going on. And remember too, Babe Ruth also died the same day as Elvis and Robert Johnson and Aretha Franklin. Elvis died that same day, and Elvis died in the year 1948, and that was the year that the Indians last won the World Series. They upset the Boston Red Sox in a one-game playoff, and then they went on to beat the Boston Braves in the World Series. just after Babe Ruth dies. The Boston Braves were even once called the Bean Eaters, the Boston Bean Eaters. Think about that. William Beans, Billy Bean. You know, why is that even a story about Daniel Murphy? Like, I mean, there's a ton of controversy going around at Daniel Murphy's, that's a thing on his Wikipedia about how he didn't like the guy because he was gay, Billy Bean. And then William Beans is the guy that Francis Scott, he went to get out. And Daniel Murphy's from Jacksonville, where this Madden shooting happened. Also, when I look up Jacksonville in regards to sporting events, it says that they had a minor league team called the Jumbo Shrimp, or they still do. And interesting that that team was originally affiliated with the Cleveland Indians when it originally came out. And Jacksonville's also who hosted the first ever Major League spring training. Another thing that this guy mentioned in his posts up here was about the Cubs tie. And if you followed my channel in 2016 when I said the Indians and the Cubs were going to play in the World Series, the Cubs, I knew for sure it was going to be the Cubs in the World Series on September 30th when they tied the Pittsburgh Pirates. They had a score of 1-1, and it was the first tie since the year 2005 when the Houston Astros went to the World Series and lost to the Chicago White Sox. But they tied 114 days before the World Series, and the word tie equals 114. And the same day the Cubs tied, we got a story about a Hoboken train wreck where 114 people got injured, and Hoboken is where the first ever Major League Baseball game was supposedly played. And I said, the Cubs have the opportunity to even go on to the World Series and win it, getting their 114th win of the season, and they were in their 114th year being called the Cubs. And when they won the World Series on Game 7, Terry Francona, the coach of the Indians, he became 11-4 in coaching World Series, right? His World Series record is 11-4, a lot like 114. This year it's the 114th World Series. Terry Francona's dad died earlier this year, and his birthday was November 4th, 11/4. And he played for the Cleveland Indians when Rocky Colavito got traded away to the Detroit Tigers. So anyway, that tie in 2016 was a 1-1 tie. And earlier in August, I noticed that on the 231st day of the year even, the Cubs tied Pittsburgh again, but it wasn't like a suspended game or anything. They finished it, but interesting was 1-1, and then the game. It was over in the 11th, right? A lot like 11-11, and 1918 was the year that it got popular to stand during the national anthem at the Cubs World Series versus Boston, and then later that year, World War I came to an end at 11-11, on 11-11, at 11, and when the Cubs tied in 2016, it was 11 years after the tie that Houston had in 2005. So it was 11 years later. The score was also 1-1. And now I see on the 231st day of the year, they tied Pittsburgh again, 1-1, and then it got 1 in the 11th. The reason 231 is important is because the national anthem at Gematria equals 231. And right around the same time that the Cubs got, or whatever, it was after the Cubs got Daniel Murphy, the Cubs also had a game that they had to play the next day, and the score was 1-1, and then the next day, the Cubs won it in the 11th inning. Like once again, 11-11. It was against Daniel Murphy's old team, the Mets, the team that's connected to Back to the Future. And then that second game, the Cubs lost, and they lost 10-3, which is interesting because The Cubs in 2016 had 103 regular season wins, and Billy Goat equals 103 in Gematria. They also stayed on 78 wins, and Cleveland equals 78. Well, so does New York. New York equals 78 in Gematria. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just really interesting that Daniel Murphy's from Jacksonville, Joe Madden being the coach of the Cubs. There's these connections to Back to the Future with the trades that they got this year. You know, maybe it's a bad sign for them. You know, every other year, like the Steve Bartman thing, you know, the 88 was not a good thing, but I don't think that's the case this year. I still think the Cubs are going to be in the World Series, possibly playing the Indians. If the Cubs aren't in the World Series, I think the Indians are going to win it. And I think the Indians are going to win it maybe regardless, but there's definitely something. It's synced up to the Indians like no other. If they don't win it, like I said, it's something that I'm supposed to see within my own life, if that makes sense. If you study this knowledge, it stems back to a belief that God created the world by merging a letter with a number. There's a lot of things that I've showed that are connected to my own life. Possibly I'm just supposed to learn something from this, and because it's happened before, and 2 years down the road, I look back at this and I go, oh, that's what I was supposed to see with all of this. Anyway, when Cole Hamels was the MVP in 2008, it was also the only World Series to ever have an official suspended game. So, just interesting. Wikipedia mentions the Earthquake series, something I've been talking about a whole lot as well. So, possibly we'll get a suspended game at the World Series this year. Or like I said, maybe we'll get an earthquake at the World Series again, or something of the sort, you know. Maybe some type of natural disaster. Natural disaster equals 231, I believe, in Gematria too. We'll type it out really quick. Natural disaster. I guess it equals 223, like the Star Spangled Banner. And that's what I was thinking of. That had to be what I was thinking of. 223, like the Star Spangled Banner. It is interesting how many, you know, recently the Cubs have been playing terrible and they've had all them rain delays and whatever. I need to think about that and look into it a little bit more, but it's interesting, you know, how many rain delays they've had. And now all of a sudden they're playing poorly. I think that's just all part of the mocking though. You know what I mean? They gotta make it look like they're not just running away with it. And then, you know, they could come back and be like, oh, they're starting to play really well at the perfect time, and whatever else. Possibly not, you know, but anyway, when I was looking up the like postponed games in regards to the World Series and how that works, I noticed that like they talked about way back in the day, a lot of them would get canceled because of it was before daylight savings time, right? And it would get too dark and whatnot. And daylight savings time, I noticed, just so happened to start in 1918, the same year that the standing during the national anthem got important or got popular, and also the same year World War I came to an end. And once again, this is the 114th World Series. World War equals 114. So does Holocaust. So does Pearl Harbor. So does Kim Jong-un. It's a super fitting year for World War symbolism to go along with the baseball season, you know. And that World Series in 1918, it ended on 9/11, which is interesting because after 9/11, when the Yankees came out of nowhere and upset the Mariners on Ichiro's birthday and whatnot, and also it was the same day Christopher Lloyd was born, right? Think about Back to the Future. But that World Series, after 9/11, it got pushed back to November 4th, 11/4, about like 114. This 9/11 symbolism is really important. That's why Ichiro Suzuki said he didn't know who Tom Brady was earlier this year. We got a story because Tom Brady came out of nowhere as well in 2001, and then, it was after the Patriot Act, and then the Patriots went on to win the Super Bowl. The Yankees upset the Mariners, 1 month and 11 days after 9/11. 9/11 leaves 111 days in the year. It was, the first plane to hit New York, the 11th state with the two buildings that look like a giant 11. The first plane to hit was flight AA 11. So A is the first letter, a lot like 11, 11, tons more stuff to that. So it's absolutely important. Anyway, I looked up daylight savings time, like I said, and when you look it up, they show you that these guys resetting the Ohio clock at the U.S. Capitol building, and in here somewhere it says like they didn't know the source of the clock's name was unknown. One myth is that the clock was meant to commemorate Ohio's admission to the Union as the 17th state, blah, 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 Well, the real reason why is Ohio is the 17th state, and it says that this clock was delivered in the year 17 on here. The word clock equals 17 in gematria. That's why, that's why it was perfect to be called the Ohio clock. For the 17th state, clock equals 17. They received it in the year 17, had 17 stars on it. The word God equals 17. It's in the same year as World War I. World War I came into an end. World War I equals 17. L equals 17. L is Saturn. The word I equals 17. Think about the eyeball on Saturn and whatnot. Saturn's also known as the keeper of time, right? And once again, think about that in regards to Back to the Future. Just kind of interesting, but Ohio in gematria equals 47, just like the word time. Think about when you set the clocks back, spring and fall. Spring and fall both equal 47 in gematria. Seasons equal 47, tick-tock 47. Think about how the Freemason square and compass is set at 47 degrees, and the tropics of Capricorn and, why can't I think of Cancer, they're separated by 47 degrees. It's a way to measure time. DC equals 47, president, government, White House, Republican, Democrat, Trump, all equal 47 in gematria. Trump's really connected to Cleveland. That's why he had his national convention there just after Cleveland won their first sports championship for the first time in 51 years. Cleveland equals 51. LeBron James equals 51. Quicken Loans equals 51. Believe, the slogan, equals 51. That's why Donald Trump and the Cavaliers went to the White House on the same day, on November 10th, did at least 51 days in the year. And LeBron James was whatever. LeBron James was Jerome from the Martin Lawrence TV show. It's all about Channel 51 for Halloween, just after winning. Martin Lawrence was 51 years old at the time. In satanic gematria, the word time equals 187. Ohio equals 187, just like Washington, D.C., just like George Washington, the 33rd degree Freemason that this, it's like the savior of this nation, apparently. And, what they call Scottish Rite Freemasonry, that equals 187. Society of Jesus equals 187. Basically the secret society within the Catholic Church. There's 187 chapters in the Torah, which is the first 5 books, of the Old Testament, which is most likely the god in there is El, which is Saturn, which is the keeper of time. So it's absolutely fitting. In Jewish gematria, the word time equals 144, just like the word light. If you write out 44, it equals 144. If you write out clock, it equals 44. There's even 1,440 minutes in a day. 1,440 minutes, a lot like 144. 2 sets of 12 hours, 12 times 12. 144. Think about it in regards to the number 88 again, too. The number 88 is like 4 circles, each made up of 360 degrees. You add all that up, you get 1,440 degrees. That's why the number 88 is so important to time. Back to the Future uses it as time travel. So, just interesting to throw that in here, I guess. I should probably make a separate video, but whatever. Guess I just wanted to make this video showing how the Cubs, or at least in the Indians, and how the baseball season is interrelated into this Jacksonville shooting and how it's connected to the War of 1812 and standing during the national anthem and whatnot. So, a lot of interrelated stories, so hopefully it makes sense. If not, watch it again, or come read my blog. Maybe it'll make a little more sense. I'll try to leave some links in the description. Have a good one. Peace.